2025 was the year I really got back into reading, which is one of the favorite things I used to do as a child. I think just in combination of building a career and trying to focus on the work thing, I completely neglected this hobby of mine. So I'm glad to report that I have gotten back into it this year. And I'm going to talk about the 19 books that I read this year. My goal was 36, didn't quite hit that, so we're going to carry that over to 2026. But the books that I did read this year were fantastic. Nothing was bad in my opinion, so I'm going to go through those and just kind of talk about that a little bit. I won't go into heavy detail for each of these books, but I will likely revisit some of these and make a separate video for it just to talk about the things that I loved about them. So my takes this year were kind of all over the place, so I've done as much as possible to try to keep these bucketed into certain categories. So one might not precisely fit, but it's just how it makes sense in my head, just for the purposes of this video. So we'll start with literary fiction. Those 4 books are Intermezzo by Sally Rooney, The Safekeep by Yael Vander Wouden, Normal People by Sally Rooney, and Transcendent Kingdom by Gyasi. I read Intermezzo first by Sally and completely fell in love with it. I thought the way that she wrote those characters, it was just something like I'd never read before. And I also didn't really do a lot of literary fiction. I was just so captivated by his thought process and how he handled different situations and the brother relationship and also just navigating grief and all that. I feel like she did such a great job of capturing those different things while still keeping the reader engaged. So that's definitely up high on my list. Next, I read Normal People, and I didn't like Normal People as much, but I still enjoyed it. I didn't find the characters and the story to speak to me that much. I'm glad that I read Intermezzo first, because if I would have read Normal People first, I don't know that I would have jumped to go to Intermezzo afterwards, just because Normal People, it kind of dragged a little bit for me midway through. The Safekeep, I liked it. That was another one where I just finished reading it and I heard about The Safekeep on the New York Times podcast, and they spoke very highly of it. And I know one of the podcast hosts talked about he read it in one day. So I was like, okay, so it must be really good. But I didn't like it as much, only because I felt like, again, midway through, it started to drag for me. And I can only have a character make the same choice over and over again so many times. And I felt like the main character in this one, I was very interested in her in the beginning. Like, I thought she was so interesting. I thought like her takes on the relationship that she was building with her brother's partner was very interesting. But I think over time, like when it kind of felt like the relationship was building and building and building and building, and then it kind of just stayed where it was and just kind of got stagnant for me. The next one was Transcendent Kingdom by Gyasi. Like, I have had that book for years. I felt called to it again this year, and I think I was between books trying to decide what to read next, and then I already had it, so I was like, let me just pick this back up, and I really enjoyed it. I think when I first tried to read this, I wasn't in the same mental state that I am now. Very interesting book. Very, I know a lot of people talk about Homegoing by the same author, and that's going to be on my list for 2026 as well. Next, we have historical fiction. I realized that I really enjoy this genre. The first one of this section is called Junie. This one is by Erin, Crosby, Eckstine, and I saw her on TikTok. And she talked about the book a little bit, and I was very intrigued by it. I read this in October during Halloween season, and I thought because of the whole spiritual aspect, it might be something really interesting. And typically, honestly, any book that's set in the slavery days, I'm probably going to be into. I thought this book was really good too. Like, I wasn't expecting this to have like a romance aspect to it, and so I was really surprised by that, but also really into it. And I just loved how the story ended. Like, I just felt like it wasn't predictable at all for me. Another one where I really fell in love with the character, loved the story, and loved how it ended. Very, very good story. Very, very good book. The other one was These Heathens by McKenzie. So this one also really enjoyed. Like, it kind of talks about set in Atlanta, set in the South, like any book that's going to be talking about Black history in that kind of way, and like the South and like the different norms and cultures and things like that. I'm always going to enjoy reading about that. So this one was a great one. I loved the voice of the main character, there were so many times where I laughed during this book too. Like, this book was so unexpectedly funny for me. It felt like it was just, my cousin was telling me one of her stories, like, honestly, and it just felt, I loved how they included a lot of history about Atlanta during that time period and how like there were different civil rights organizations and things like that that were going on at that time too, and what they were fighting for, and how our character was able to weave her story into that. I enjoyed that a lot too. And this book actually inspired me to watch Rustin on Netflix, which I really enjoyed too, which talks about that era a lot of, we know the civil rights leaders, a lot of the larger ones like Martin Luther King, John Lewis, etc. But hearing about some of those other figures that were instrumental to that movement was really interesting for me too. Next is Blessings by Chukwuebuka Ibeh. Really love this one. Like, this one was, I feel like I'm saying that about every book, but I really enjoyed this one because it was set in Nigeria, and I haven't read a lot of books that are based in Africa. And then within this community in particular, what this character was going through was so relevant to, I think there's some persecution going on right now for the LGBTQ community too, but just being able to read about that, get their understanding and understand what he was going through. Like, I just thought it was it almost read like it was a memoir, even though I know it was fiction, but it read like a memoir. I felt like I was really reading someone's real story. One thing that I really enjoyed about this book the most is the way the mom was characterized. I think a lot of times, like when we talk about books of like coming of age stories where main characters are exiled from their families because of their sexual orientation, I think it was really interesting to read about the mother's perspective and how she allowed it to happen, but on a deeper level, I felt like she was more open-minded than culturally she was necessarily allowed to be. So I just thought that struggle there between a character that wasn't considered a main character was really interesting for me to read. The next one is Harlem Rhapsody by Victoria Christopher Murray. This was the first historical fiction that I read this year, and I thought it was pretty interesting because I'm hearing about people and I'm Googling them as I'm reading, and I'm like, oh, this is a real person, this is a real person. That was one of the things I liked about the book the most, was that it taught me a lot about real figures, which I guess is what historical fiction is meant to do. Really liked it, really thought it was a great story. Didn't necessarily, the ending kind of fell flat for me a little bit, just because I was hoping that, the main character was going to have, well, actually, I don't know. I just think towards the end, like, I feel like the book kind of resolved itself earlier. I went on a little bit longer than it needed to, I think. I guess is the way I'll put it. Because it seemed like the main character was like having a struggle, and then like she kept going back through the same struggle again and again, which obviously is real life because a lot of times it takes more than one time to learn things. So that's one thing about it too. But again, for this Harlem Rhapsody to be my first, foray into historical fiction, really loved it. Like, this was what made me keep going back to the genre overall. Next, we have the romance genre. So romance is not something that I generally would gravitate towards, but this year there was a few times where I felt like, okay, let me just give this a shot just for a lighthearted, easy read. I have a feel-good story. So the first one is Good Material by Dolly Alderton. Love this book. Like, it was so funny, and I love how the story was told from the perspective of a man who was dumped. And so we got that process to understand, like, okay, what is going on through his mind. And like, he was kind of a troubled guy. It was very interesting how they talked a lot about his story and how he was a comedian, and just how people in society in general views relationships, I think, is interesting. And it felt like it was a commentary on how people look at relationships overall, and not only while they're going on, but while they're ending too. So I thought it was a very good, it's definitely a book that I might would reread just because it was so funny. Next was Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. I loved it. Like, it was like, a little cookie cutter, a little Lifetime movie, but when I read it, that's what I needed at the time. And I was just really into the story. Like, it was very much so like the trope of the city girl and the country guy getting together, and I just enjoyed it. Like, it didn't feel very long. Like, it was a very quick read for me. I love how she was able to capture a lot of that emotion. And like, if you want to have a relationship start, like, and be in a relationship, it's like, this is an example of what you would want it to be. I probably will revisit her again for some other books in the series. I know this is like, I think this might be like the second book in the series or the third. I feel like for what it's worth, as far as like what that book represented at the time, it was a really great read for me. Okay, the next section, I just called it like so much going on, because I don't really, these books are all kind of just novels that just kind of fall into different genres themselves. So the first one is Babel by R.F. Kuang. I love this book. I haven't read Catabasis yet, but I'm definitely adding that into my list for next year. I thought Babel was really good because it was my first experience with dark academia, magic, and I really liked it. And I was just like, okay, this book, it felt a little long towards the end. I loved how it really transported me to this era and these characters. And the only thing I didn't like about it was how at the end, one of the characters made a choice that I feel like I would have loved for her not to have made that choice, which is okay. Next, we have Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. This one was such a crazy ride for me. Like, I remember being a little like feeling it was so slow in the beginning, but then once I thought about what was happening and once I picked up on what was going on, it was just like I was on a roller coaster ride. Like, it felt like you were going up slowly and then you just kind of crashed down, and it was just so much going on throughout the end of that book. I was like, whoa. So after I finished the book, I watched the series on Apple TV. I had to just see the visual representation of this. And I wasn't disappointed by the show either. I liked the show a lot. I remember I literally would read this at night and I would be like going to sleep and I'd be thinking like, what is going on? Like, this is one of those books that kind of just get into your head and just makes you so confused. But once I caught on and I realized what was going on, like, it was a wrap from there. So I really enjoyed that. Next one is The Dream Hotel by Laila Lalami. I wish the ending would have been different, but I love the concept of the story. I think the people trapped in a mental facility, it was kind of like futuristic in a way of like people getting into your thoughts and your dreams and like everything that the characters are kind of going through. Like, I would love if there's a part 2 to this, because I feel like there's so much more you can explore in that. I thought the premise of the book in the first 75% I really loved, I really enjoyed. It's not something that I thought about, but you know what, when you think about what's going on in the world today, it's like, obviously you can see that stuff like this could actually happen in the future. The last one is Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby. Really like this one. I did pick up King of Ashes recently, by S.A. Cosby, so I'm looking forward to reading that. But yeah, I liked Razorblade Tears a lot. Like, I thought the story was really good. It just was a lot going on. It was a lot. Like, some of the situations and the choices that the characters are making were a lot to read. It was a lot to take in, but I thought the story was really good. Definitely enjoyed it. Looking forward to reading more S.A. Cosby. The last section is memoirs. Memoirs used to actually be my favorite type of book to read. I mean, after this year, reading so many different types of books, I think that's shifted a bit, but I did still get quite a few memoirs in this year, and I'm really happy about that. The first one that I read was Lovely One by Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. Her story of becoming a judge on the Supreme Court. Just really amazing story. I mean, then I also read Tina Knowles, Matriarch. You obviously want to know that story. So it was a really great one as well. 107 Days by Kamala Harris. Obviously had to read that. It was good to read about it and understand what she was trying to do during that time. Next was Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. Really love this one. I just feel like Ta-Nehisi in general is just such a great writer. He's such a great speaker. Everything that he puts out is always so well thought out and cool. And I've had this book for a few years now, so I'm happy I was able to go into it. Then finally, Go Tell It on a Mountain by James Baldwin. Baldwin is one of my favorite authors. And you know, it was nice to get into one of the books that I feel like a lot of people know him for. The way James Baldwin is able to keep you engaged in a story is just out of this world. And also, you know, being that this was in Harlem, really any book that's set in Harlem, I'm going to pretty much enjoy it. So of all the books that I read this year, if I had to pick one of the most iconic scenes and one of my favorite parts of reading this year, I would say Go Tell It on the Mountain, when at the end of the book, when the main character, John, is going through what's referred to as catching the Holy Ghost, essentially having like an out-of-body experience in the church. The way this was characterized was just so interesting to me. It was so descriptive, and I loved how it was an ending, and it was sort of like a cathartic release that happened towards the end after you read so many things about what this kid was going through. Just felt like it was such an appropriate level of climax in the story. In 2026, so my one goal for next year is just to read more. So I really enjoyed allowing myself to get back into the flow of reading this year, and I'm going to be posting a lot on this channel about the different books that I'm reading. I definitely want to go into more fantasy. I read some Octavia Butler a couple years ago, and like that was like the only book I read in a year, and it was really good. I want to get back into her. Also want to explore more Toni Morrison's work as well. This is all of the books that I read this year. Probably get one more done this year. Reading Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. Loving it so far. But yeah, if you made it this far into the video, please let me know what your favorite video 2025 was. and I will probably add it to my TBR. In the meantime, I will see you all in the next video. Bye.